Hello. If you guys could please take your seats, I will really appreciate it. We're about to start our second panel. Thank you guys so much. Are we ready to start? Thank you. Take your seats. Thank you guys so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Nancy Garcia. I'm the one taking the picture, so if you want your picture, just be like me, and I'll take it for you. Absolutely. When I'm not taking pictures, I'm actually a math teacher, but right now I'm doing my master's. Oh, thank you. I'm doing my master's in education policy and analysis. And why this panel? These panels explore the transformative potential of AI in curriculum design, in assessment, and in evaluation. AI can personalize pathways, adapt content to diverse learning needs, and provide real-time feedback for students and for teachers. Yet, it raises a critical question. How do you ensure that AI-driven curricula reflects local cultures and values? How can we assess systems, and how can we redesign them to promote meaningful learning over standardized testing? The speakers will discuss balancing innovation with inclusivity, ensuring that AI supports holistic and culturally relevant education. Our amazing moderator, who will introduce himself, is Dede.
So in my 25 years at Harvard, I was a professor of learning technologies for 22 of them, and now I'm a senior research fellow. I don't want to say much about me because my job is to highlight our four amazing panelists, but my work in AI began in 1970 when I was a graduate student, and I read an article that claimed that we wouldn't need any teachers by the end of the 1970s because, well, you can see that the history of forecasting in AI is very limited. Two things that I do that do relate to this panel. One is that I am a co-PI and the Associate Director for Research of the National AI Institute on Adult Learning and Online Education. This is basically workforce upskilling, reskilling, and workforce entry. And of course, that also includes teachers and educators upskilling and reskilling. The other is that I co-founded and co-host a podcast series called Silver Lining for Learning. This started 5 years ago during the week in March that the pandemic shut everything down. 4 of us who were experts in online learning said, we'll start this little podcast so that people know how to make the transition during COVID. And in 10 weeks or so, when the pandemic's over, we'll stop doing it. Well, that wasn't a very successful forecast. Also, we just did episode 227. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that each episode is an hour long, and about 2/3 of the 227 episodes are set in Global South countries, and they deal with really innovative things that are happening bottom up, largely, in the Global South. So I hope you'll take a look at the Silver Lining for Learning podcast series and consider that to be a resource. So one by one, I'll introduce the panelists and ask them to say about their work, and then we'll move into having a conversation and eventually open the conversation to be with you and your questions. So Dr. Asyia Kazmi is the Global Education Policy Lead at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, focusing on effective instructional practices, EdTech, and AI. She has a proven track record of impact as head of maths and program officer, working closely with partners in India. She has impacted over 11 million children. Dr. Asyia was awarded an Order of the British Empire and the Queen's 2022 New Year's Honors List for education services, particularly girls' education, and she is also a mother to 2 boys. So Asyia, please tell us about your work.
Thank you very much. It was brilliant to hear somebody said there's a teacher of mathematics, and I always start with that. I am a teacher of mathematics. And I was using AI in the late 90s, and I want to give a quick story about this. So it was very new at that time. It was a school in London. It was a rough school, challenging circumstances, high poverty. And out of 4 maths lessons, 1 maths lesson was in this EdTech lab, and all the children are facing the computer, working on that computer. And I'm thinking here, I'm a maths teacher, what is the point of me in this classroom? But the brilliant thing about that technology was it was giving data on the students. And so I was able to take that class, split it in half. Half of them would get the privilege, and I do assert it was a privilege to have my teaching, on the data that was showing that was their gaps, and then we would swap over. And that part and parcel of really effective curriculum, etc., gave us about a 30 percentage point increase in learning outcomes in under 3 years. That put us in top 2% value add in the country. And so a career in education that looks at teaching, teacher support, inspection. I was one of Her Majesty's inspectors, and I accidentally fell into international development. And in international development, it was very, very surprising to me that we were not talking about learning outcomes. We were not talking about pedagogy, that we would talk about, we've got to train teachers, but we wouldn't say, what is it that we want teachers to be trained on? What is it that will be different as a result of what teachers are supported to do? And most importantly, what impact would it have on learning outcomes? Cut to the future, and it's different. We are talking about learning outcomes. We are talking about equity gaps. And I joined the Gates Foundation 6 years ago, and our focus in the global education space, so we have a long-standing large US program, but my focus is in the global education space, is this statistics. If you are born in a high-income country, 9 out of 10 children will be able to read by the age of 10, but if you're born in a low-income country, 9 out of 10 will not. So those of you who are shocked at the statistics, why? That means the data, that fact is not known. But it's also, somebody challenged me recently saying it's a depressing statistics. It's not something that's empowering. But we also know what to do about it. We know solutions exist that can work in many diverse contexts that make a difference. And I want to cut to India now. Last month, I think the Asyia 2024 results, which are household surveys, were produced, and it showed a 16 percentage point increase in literacy outcomes, 16 percentage point on the pre-pandemic level. And that was in UP, Uttar Pradesh, that's working with 8 million students. And what did they do? They had structured pedagogy, which I basically say is common sense, right? You have guidance to teachers that packages the science of teaching, the science of learning, and you make it easier for teachers to take it up. You have an aligned teacher training, you have coaching, and you have assessment that's linked. So where does AI fit in there? Where does technology fit in there? And experimenting with how do you support take-up, how do you support scale, how do you make assessment more fun, more engaging, are things that we are working on, and we're working with partners on. So it's brilliant to be here. I think it's amazing what the organizers have done here, but I'm going to hand over.
So I want to introduce Dr. Vinnie Jauhari, who is an education industry director in the Microsoft Worldwide Public Sector team and an educationist. In her earlier role, she was the Director of Learning and Skills for the India region. She manages strategic engagements with the Ministry of Education, leading universities, and national and state boards of education. Her work focuses on transformation through AI and the cloud, leading various faculty and student innovation programs in education. Her work empowers education systems, educational leaders, teachers, and students. So Vinnie, please share your work.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. At Microsoft, it's been an amazing journey over the last 11 years, working with millions of teachers, state boards of education, and higher education as well, including Ministry of Education and Ministry of Skills Development. In India and many other countries like that, one of the major challenges is employability. You're looking at leveraging new technologies for startups. And our work in India has focused on empowering students, educators, and contributing to startup ecosystem as well. In fact, in one of our partnerships with one of the large state governments that has 2 million students in higher education, we partnered on curriculum development and assessments wherein the government encouraged industry participation. And as a part of the curriculum and credits, Microsoft certifications were included in the realm of artificial intelligence, data sciences, cybersecurity. 165,000 students underwent training on these areas. They get coached on applications, and this was led by one of our partners, Microsoft, and government. It's a very fine example of that partnership across 300 colleges and 16 universities across the state. Technology was leveraged, and 100,000 students were able to complete those certifications. That's a world benchmark and one of the largest projects in the world. And 40,000 internships got created. The government made the investment, and I think it gave us such powerful lessons of a fine leadership with a great vision, and then different stakeholders coming together to make things happen on the ground. Usually investments are made, but it's when the implementation has to happen, it falls apart. Another example is that in a large country where you speak more than 50 different languages, every 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers you drive down, the language and the diction changes. And to make education more inclusive, availability of textbooks, availability of teaching in local languages plays a very important role. We partnered with one of the governing and accrediting bodies in India under Ministry of Education, where OpenAI applications were leveraged to translate medical literature, engineering books. At the click of a button, the entire book could be translated. And there are videos in India, thousands of videos which are made available to different colleges and schools where they do not have good quality teachers, but they want students to be empowered. But just listening through hundreds of videos is a very big challenge. So there they have, through the use of OpenAI applications, the videos can be heard in your local languages and 65 foreign languages as well, and it works perfectly well. And AI is being leveraged and tinkered to get ideas, to get more insights into how those, what is the learning from those videos, or what is the learning from those books. So what could have taken months and years in order to kind of get insights into learning experiences can be done within weeks and days, and that's a phenomenal contribution to millions of students. You have 40 million in higher education and 250 million in school education.
So next I'll introduce Tonee Ndung'u, a visionary entrepreneur, technologist, and education reform advocate dedicated to transforming learning experiences through innovation. As the founder and CEO of Kytabu, an award-winning ed tech company, He is pioneering AI-driven solutions to enhance education accessibility, teacher professional development, and student engagement across Africa. With over a decade of experience in technology and education, Tonee has led groundbreaking initiatives, and his work has garnered support from global partners. After Tonee, we'll go directly to Nissi, who you met in the first panel. So, Tonee.
I'm not even sure what to say now that you've said all of that. Like, do you have questions? Okay, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. My name is Tonee. I'm from Nairobi. First time being in Boston. Very nice to be here. The weather is not as bad as everyone told me it would be. I'm going to ask some random questions. How many of you wear glasses in the room? Just put your hands up. That's what? Let's just assume that's like half? Right, half, right? Okay. How many of you, I'm assuming most of you are going to use iOS. How many of you know what software version you have? Which means it's got like a number, 18.1.3. Don't say it out loud. Just how many of you know? How many of you, of those who know when it updated? 1, 2, 3, maybe like 10 if I'm going to assume it. So let's just put it this way. To the previous session we had earlier, where we talked about how AI changes so drastically, and we're anticipating and expecting that teachers need to keep up with that. It's like asking you to keep up with the software versions of your devices, right? And one of the biggest, I'm looking for a good word, discrepancy, craziness, somewhere in between, is expecting a teacher who is completely flawed by the responsibilities they currently have to now be on top of AI. I live in AI. I'm still not on top of AI. So a lot of what we have realized in Kenya, and we're learning, and we'll talk about some partnerships we have in this room, is that when we started looking at what AI does, we realized the first thing we need to appreciate is let's stop trying to get our hands on it. Stop trying to get it. Like, it's like a toddler, just leave it alone. As long as it doesn't die, just leave it alone. If there's silence, you go and check. But if there's no silence, it's going to figure itself out. First one. The second one also, we need to find a way to embed AI, this is going to sound bizarre, work with me, on teachers and make it so that they don't have to care about it anymore. And so I'll give you a little bit of a story. I come from a family of teachers. My mother's a lecturer. She's done it 35 years. My father is one as well. He was the third dentist in Kenya in 1960, 70 something. And my brother became a lecturer. He's in Asyia in Doha, which is like the best sports school there. They poached him out of Kenya. And my sister was also poached by Pfizer from being to get into pharmaceuticals. I am dyslexic, so I was the dumb kid in the house. And so I struggled through school. But my father recognized that whenever we listened to music in the car, I'm going to say some names. Let me see how many of you know this. How many of you remember Kenny Rogers? Voila. You see, I saw the Indian gentleman. Allow me to call you Indian because you look like my neighbor from the crib. He's like, I remember him. He was my friend. And then, and Dolly Parton. I'm assuming these are your people, Charlie Pride, that vibe, right? That was my father's music. My music, let's see. Biggie? Anyone? Pac? Anyone? Wu-Tang? Anyone? So whenever we were doing these road trips, we had a deal. Dad plays his music for an hour. I play my music for an hour. It didn't go so well. But in all of that, he recognized that whenever he played his music, I memorized all the lyrics in 2 plays. And he was like, why are you getting E's and D's in class? But you do this one flow. And I was the first kid in my high school to get a Sony Walkman. I know very few of you know what that is. She's laughing at me. She's like, you are that guy. There you go. And I recorded my own books for myself. And when I got out of high school, I was the 4th best in a class of 138, where I had been the 3rd best from the back for 3 years. And that's when I got to learn that I don't necessarily believe in different learning styles, but we just have different skill sets. And I was fortunate to get out of school, get into university, finish that, and build a small tech hub called the Nile Lab, which together with my friend Eric Husman, who built the iHub, was the foundations of what is now called the Silicon Savannah. So all the tech companies based out of East Africa were built on the shoulders of a stupid kid. And the two of us basically put together what has now become 160,000 startups in the last 15 years out of my city. So EdTech for me is going back to the roots and fixing what was broken for me for other kids. And it's good to be here.
Yes. All right. So just talking about my work at the Co-Creation Hub, So the Co-Creation Hub, essentially, we describe ourselves as a Pan-African innovation ecosystem enabler. So we take an ecosystem approach to thinking about how innovation and technology can be accelerated to drive Africa's prosperity across a number of different areas, education being one of them. And for us, and the work that we're doing in education is essentially saying you cannot accelerate or create prosperity for Africa if you do not have a skilled and talented, workforce. And essentially, it's how do we empower and build that highly innovative thinkers who are solving our most pressing problems and leveraging technology to improve learning outcomes to be able to do that. And so, in a nutshell, basically what that work looks like is supporting innovators like Tonee, who are interested in building contextualized solutions that are addressing a number of these challenges in our education sector, working very closely with government. I know Maria mentioned about leaders who have that political will and that drive, to want to bring about or improve learning outcomes and changing those statistics that Asyia mentioned. And supporting them to think differently and reimagining how technology can be integrated to be able to ensure that we're delivering on learning outcomes. And then there's a third bit of that, which is, and we've been hearing a number of those questions in the room, how do we keep all of this sustainable? How do we scale it? How do we make sure that entrepreneurs like Tonee who are building these solutions actually have their businesses growing and sustainable, and that the children that we actually care about ensure that this is accessible and affordable to them? And so that's essentially what I wake up every morning thinking about and ensuring that we're able to achieve. Thank you.
So we agreed to have a conversation, and the starter question that I want to ask deals with the contrast between doing things better and doing better things. So we're all happy to work on doing things better and fixing parts of the current education system that need help. And it's appropriately been a part of our discussion today. But the real opportunity of learning technologies is often doing better things. And so what I want to ask each of you to talk about briefly is, as you look ahead in the next few years, is there a type of doing better things that you're excited about? And is there a concern you have about using AI as a lever in order to accomplish that? Because we want to be balanced about both the hope and the hype in terms of what's going on with AI. And for me, this question is really important and something I think a lot about, because otherwise what we're going to have is AI as a kind of digital duct tape to hold together an obsolete industrial era education system, which is not where we want to be with this new technology. So would you like to start?
Yikes. I think it's a really, really good question. Doing things better or doing better things? And is there a difference between the two? And maybe there isn't. I am really interested in how do we improve the quality of teaching and learning, and how can technology enhance that? And sometimes technology can't, but sometimes it really can. So I'll give you two examples, one from a high-income country setting and one from a low-income country setting. And it touches on some of the first panel and as well as what Dina talked about. High-quality content is king. And that infused with really good pedagogy and our understanding of how children learn, how the brain functions, how adults take up resources. During the pandemic in England, in 12 weeks, a group of teachers got together and they created lesson plans, and it's now Oak National Academy. Then the government supported that, and then they invested further in it. And so they really refined these lesson plans. And they are open educational resources. They're available for anyone, and from grade 1 to grade 11, because our school stops at grade 11, or secondary school, higher education continues. Our school stops at 11 in many different subjects. Now, because they're open resource and they are, you're able to personalize them, contextualize them, they're a very good starting point for others to take those resources on and think about them. And they've used that corpus to then say, how can AI layer personalize and contextualize? So if I'm teaching a geography lesson on flooding, I can ask it to say, can you take the flooding incidences that happen locally? In sub-Saharan context, in Malawi, you can have classrooms of 97 children, I have counted, and teachers are teaching, and they're teaching effectively. But they've also got now the experimenting with 1 billion, which is a personalized math system. The evidence says that it has improved learning outcomes, but then we're researching at a small scale and not sufficiently enough at a larger scale. And so that trajectory is really important. In Kenya, IDO is a program that's taken the government's lesson plans, put it into a mobile phone because that's what teachers have, and then also put an IDO corner in the maths classroom where 2 or 3 students at a time can go to the corner and work on the system, that is, work on the lesson through the personalized adaptive thing. And we saw that it had an impact on all students, but it had a greater impact on the students who were further behind. So that equity agenda is really important. We're seeing similar innovations coming out of India. So Chimple, again, had impact as a personalized adaptive learning software. It had an impact on all students, but had a greater impact on those students further behind. Now we're looking at supporting research at a district level. And in a district in India could be up to 2,500 schools, right? So 2 districts could make up a country in other places. And I think it's really important that we start off with high quality content. We really look at working with those who are going to use it, the teachers and the students, and that we are constantly evaluating for impact. And from that, new questions will be generated. So that R&D function, EdTech should need to do, but also pedagogical R&D so that we're having more impactful solutions. So I'm interested in how we can improve teaching and learning, and through improving teaching and learning, finding new ways of doing things, better things.
I think there is merit in exploring both the opportunities to do things better and also doing better things. Because if we look at the reality of our country and countries like ours, there is more than 70% dropout from a school to higher education level. And the government is struggling to take it to about 30% or 50% over the next 2 decades. Therefore, we need to really rethink about how do we do things better, both in K-12 as well as higher education. In terms of, for example, content development, curriculum, I think we need to relook beyond standard textbooks and textbook-oriented teaching and assessments, because if we just restrict ourselves to limited textbooks and assess on one single pattern of examination, it encourages rote learning, and there is a whole parallel system of coaching and getting admissions to higher education for 10 million students appearing for 3,500 seats to get admission into few good colleges is not a sustainable education model. So I think we need to really rethink, and AI can help, even if the learning outcomes are defined, the quality of input, both at K-12 and higher education, can be radically very different. I've spent first 15 years of my life, teaching and researching and published those papers and books. And for every single hour, I would put in 15 to 20 hours because I would want to make up for my lack of industry experience during the early years. And I would struggle bringing videos, examples, relating to the industry, so that I wanted to see that spark in the eyes of my students, and that every hour they would be with me, it would be worth it for them to be in my class. And that got translated into writing. Today, when I relook at, like, if I want to teach for an hour and I have defined outcomes, the quality of inputs that I would have spent 15 hours, I can do it now within 15 minutes. Bringing the best research papers, contradicting viewpoints, and having summaries of those in the limited time span. It's just amazing and a wow experience from a teaching learning standpoint. Another aspect is, in India, almost $450 million gets spent on teaching 4 million teachers across 1.2 million schools or so. It's a huge amount of money. And the hope is that teachers will become better teachers, they'll be able to engage students better, they'll be able to develop critical thinking exercises, because we want students to be problem solvers and be prepared for life. And despite those investments, we still see there is a challenge learning outcomes. We are struggling with moving up the needle there. But with this, if we can have good learning outcomes, beautiful assessments that are scenario-based. I was tinkering and doing some tinkering with the AI engines, like teach the basics of sound or basics of light, and I don't want to teach from the textbook. Give me 3 exercises where my students do not have resources, but can use paper, thread, speakers that could be made from paper, and create multiple groups. I'm not teaching at grade 6 level or grade 8 level, but with my first degree of physics, it was an astonishing experience, and I tried it in multiple ways. If I were an entrepreneurship teacher teaching master students, there are such beautiful applications, and doing better things. I think analytics at a statewide class, at a class level, at a school level, at a district and a state level, where you have 50 million kids and you're wanting to improve their English speaking skills or math skills. I think analytics on communication patterns in the classroom, difficulty with the words, pauses, all those things. How can a teacher do that for every 50 students in a classroom with just few hours in a day? But AI and technology insights can help to make those transformations. So I think, and even programs where billions of dollars get spent and nothing, the money goes in, the impact doesn't come out. I think we need to rethink about what, where, and how much should we invest. And if technology can help me land better impact, then why not? And I think it's open to experimentation. I'm not saying there is one correct thinking, but I think we need to tinker with multiple cultures, experiences, and I think we're all learning in the process.
Absolutely. I think that, Asyia and Vinnie's comments are quite spot on and align with a lot of my thinking as well, in terms of doing things better, doing better things. And I think my perspective is in doing things better, you find opportunity to do better things. And for instance, I come from Nigeria. It's the largest country by population in Africa, and where you have majority of our population are young people under the age of 35. And so we often talk about this teeming youth population that we're excited about because it holds immense potential to catalyze growth and prosperity for the country. But we also know that if we do not effectively empower them with the skills to build that future, then things will become very tricky for us. And it's basically going back and saying, in terms of improving the quality of teaching and learning, what key things do we need to do? How do we support teachers to be able to transform learning in their classroom? And thinking as well in terms of our vision for what type of empowered talent do we want to have in the country? How do we want them to build these skills, the critical thinking, the problem-solving skills? I like what she said about, scenarios. And one example that I often give about how helping our young people build these skills can start as early as, early childhood, right? Typically, when you look at the curriculum, it would say, if you're teaching children shapes, it's like, this is a circle, this is a square, right? All of that. And then you go a step higher and say, look around you, what examples of shapes, of circles, squares and things like that do you have? And I often say to teachers and say, imagine that we take it even a step higher and say to children, if you look at a car, what are the shapes of the tires of the car? Oh, it's a circle. Brilliant. Why isn't it a triangle or a square? And so at that point, it gets them thinking differently about, now shapes don't just exist as, shapes. You can basically connect these concepts to real world, and as you design and as you start to solve problems. And empowering our teachers with the ability to think like that and resources that they can use to transform that type of learning in their classroom is very critical. And that's what I think I'm excited about AI being able to do for them. Not just providing the lesson plans that, of course, would integrate a lot of this, but also empowering them with the skills to be able to effectively deliver those lessons in their class. Another element as well, and I think Dina had mentioned this during the keynote, is the power of personalized tutoring. But not just because, it's a great thing or it's nice to have, but I don't know if you've ever sat through a class where there's a tiny misconception that you have in a particular, process. And then you have someone start again all over from the beginning, teaching you through everything. You're just like, yeah, I know all of these points, right? This is the bit that I'm struggling with. And if you could just unlock that, then everything continues to flow. And providing that type of differentiated instruction in the classroom and helping teachers to be able to do that for the number of students that they have, I think is also very powerful and something that I'm excited about, that technology and that AI can help us do, and really get to that point where we're helping our children to be able to build those skills, not just having a deeper understanding of the concept, but being able to then focus on the application of these concepts and being able to build the skills that we know, is required for our future. And so essentially is just thinking critically and saying, with the myriad of, challenges and opportunities that we have within the context of our countries and where it is that we want to go, how can we effectively leverage this to do things better? Another element of that is you talk to a number of, government stakeholders who say, well, yeah, we do assessments, all of those. But then what do we do with that information? What do we do with that data? How does it go back into helping teachers improve instruction in the classroom? How does it even help government understand what is happening in terms of the type of skills and competencies that their children have? And to what she said about investments, then be able to target these investments appropriately, to know where we need to have more teachers, where we need to have support teachers to improve their skills. And so that's also another level, right? How can I'm excited about what it can do with helping them see that information and then be able to ensure that that informs instruction in the classroom, but then also guides investment and make sure that we're able to maximize investments or resources, the limited resources that we have, quite honestly. I think in the previous panel what we're talking about, and we see that a lot in Nigeria, when they talk about being excited about technology in education, we've seen a number of projects that just has to do with putting technology in the classroom. But there's nothing around how to ensure that that's effectively used. And usually how I talk about it is if I go back to a government stakeholder and say, oh, here are exciting initiatives or interventions you need to put money into, they'll say, oh, yeah, but we already did that. And it didn't produce any results. And so it's about maximizing those investments that already exist, and then also ensuring that future investments are able to be effectively targeted to the areas where it can help us achieve the biggest outcomes that we want to see in terms of empowering our young people.
There's very little to add to that, but I will speak from a very capitalistic mindset. When you run a company that's bottom line depends on how good what you build is, the outcome is very directly related to the survival of the company, right? So they are, and I'm just gonna, allow me to play around with words. They're extremely intelligent in the way they've done this. I'm extremely greedy in the way I'm gonna do this. You know what I'm saying? Are you seeing what I mean by that? And so when we were building solutions and looking at what AI can do, one of the things we did intentionally was travel. And so I got my team and we went to Estonia. And we were there when ChatGPT EDU was being planned out and launched. In fact, they launched it on February 25th in partnership with the government, and we left that night. What did we learn? We saw how they were going to implement this. Essentially, the way they're thinking about it is they want to personalize every child's tutor. Did that English come out right? They want every child to have a personalized tutor. I think that's what I said. That's what I want to say. And what does that mean? What that means is they want a consistent, I'm going to use my own words. These are totally my own words, so do not quote me. I didn't say this and that. But from my point of view, they want a second brain for every child in the country. And what does that look like? So in Kenya, we come from the central region where there's a mountain, Mount Kenya, so we are farmers. And my grandmother used to tell us one of the biggest changes in the region was when the introduction of drip irrigation came about. Because as you know, leeward, windward side of the mountains, there are times when you're going to have too much rain, and then there are times you're going to have none at all. And so depending on how much rain you do or do not have, your people starve or your people are very wealthy, and there was no way to store food at the time. So if you store corn in a spot and it gets kind of moldy and you starve for the rest of the time. And drip irrigation basically meant we could collect the water from the rain in a clay-built type water storage system. We're talking like when she was 14. She died 4 years ago at 98. So this is a long time ago. And they would store water there and then drip irrigation would do the work. And that was, for me, the first time I ever came across real time I'm trying to figure out how to say it in English, but real time, is it on demand? Yeah, service? It's on demand service, right? That's the first time I came across real time on demand service. When I need the water's right there. When I don't, I don't. And so while we were in Estonia, one of the things we learned, and we've been talking about it with Nissi, is teachers cannot keep up with the new technology that's showing up. Do you remember we talked about glasses? And so we thought to ourselves, exactly what does AI look like technologically? Because in Kenya, we do two things that the rest of the world has not been able to do. We send money on text, and we send a lot. Like, we send $800 million on text daily, 27 trillion shillings a year. The second fastest moving country is, it's like a marathon with Kenyans in it. You know how we leave everyone? By the time people are showing up, we're sending postcards, we've gone for dinner and watched movies. That's the distance we have with the next best country. But the second thing that Kenyans do really easy is we adopt technology very quickly. We don't have a fear of trying things out that could fail. And so when we looked at what is possible and what technology looks like, we realized that Meta just took glasses and made Ray-Ban look cool, and then put a $600 tag on it. And so Janet Sawari, one of our partners, flew to Shenzhen and asked, how much does it actually cost to do this, minus the brands and the logos? $47. $47. And so we said, okay, so if you could give us a small language model that boasts in English and Kiswahili, 256 GB of storage space, 2 cameras, a microphone, and speakers on the back, how much does that cost? If we get it en masse, $90. So you're telling me I could give my teacher a digital assistant in class that gives them drip irrigation information that these professionals have mentioned? Because structured pedagogy is just that. It's not complicated. It's structured pedagogy. It can give them real-time enforcement and allow them to deploy it, to your point, in a classroom setup where internet is limited, where they don't have the resources to pull something up except their mobile phone, and now standard mobile phone is more expensive than $90. And this is something that is scalable. And so that's what we're trying to build out. Because the thing that Kenya has taught the rest of the world is we are really good at leapfrogging. You go do the phone lines with the cabling and all of that, then just give us the mobile phones and we'll show you how it's done. And so that's how, to your question, I wouldn't even say, should we do better things or should we do things better? I'm like, should we do different things or should we do things different? And I think I'm leaning into the doing things different mindset.
So I want to come back to the difference between doing things better and doing better things. essentially, the way my head thinks about teaching, you plan your lesson, you teach your lesson, you assess the lesson, you use that data plan again. And that applies at all levels of teaching. But, and so we need better ways of producing better quality textbooks, more effective teacher training, more effective teaching, enactment of teaching, whether it's through technology or whether it's hybrid, and we definitely do need teachers in the loop. Doing better things comes to what somebody said about this was the first Global South AI conference, but there's been many AI conferences without the Global South. Let's do that better. Let's look at where investment is going. Let's do that better. A very small percentage is going into sub-Saharan Africa. When we're looking at who are we investing in, what is the local talent and the local expertise, and investing directly in there rather than flying people in and flying people out. Let's look at what's the data that's going into these large language models and make sure that the data is representative so that it is of the local languages, of the local dialects, of the younger students as well as the older students. Let's look at where the compute facility is and the capacity is and make sure that we augment that. And then let's really look at who's doing the researching and what the researchers, who's producing the research, who's commissioning the research, and how relevant that research is. So let's make sure that we don't have a two-tier system, because the dangers with AI is arrival technology. It's being used by people. Perhaps it's being used by students more than the teachers are even using it. But the risk is that it widens the inequality as opposed to afford the opportunity of closing the inequality gap.
So we want to move to your questions, and in particular, I'd like you to ask your question rather than me. So Melika, you had a question?
Thank you all. Let me pull up my question to make sure I'm asking it right. Thank you all for being such phenomenal speakers and being here today. My question was, how do you suggest de-influencing edtech founders a little bit on the magic and hype of AI? Because I feel like everyone and their mother is just jumping on the AI and education trend, at least from my perspective. I'm one of them, but I try to do it a little bit critically. And how do you encourage focus on better pedagogy and evaluation, which seems to me to be a little bit lacking sometimes?
So you don't want to crush the innovation, the creativity, and the enthusiasm from developers. But I think the answer is actually quite simple. Just like, so what? You're doing all of this, you're reaching all of these people, so what? What difference is it making to what you intended to make a difference to? I always ask, how is it improving learning outcomes? And I don't accept the answer, it takes a long time, right? If I'm going to be teaching you Pythagoras and you don't know it by the end of the week, there is something wrong with my teaching. And the whole point of technology, the data is really available. And often the technologists will show me about, usage data, right? I'm like, so what? So what if they're using it? I got addicted to Candy Crush. I had 3 phones running at the same time. There was no learning happening. And so that's really important. But also, is what I was saying earlier about what is, when you're training teachers, and often in India, the scale is massive, and we've trained hundreds of thousands of teachers. So what? What difference has it made to their teaching? And then what difference has that teaching made to the learning? And so when you're asking those kind of questions, and then we're also incentivizing, right? As funders, we can be saying that this is what your system can do. Can it do it for the underserved? Can it do it for those who can't afford to pay? So that Tonee, who's wanting to have budget for his business and have a profit, like, well, no, I need you to be thinking about this group of underserved students as well. And then creating systems and creating tools and products that allow evaluation to take place, and that evaluation that is comparable against different countries when you're looking at the similar age group. And in the next panel, I think you'll hear a little bit about some of the AI for education work it's doing, which is really scrutinizing the quality of large language models on particular use cases, on particular qualities of pedagogy as well. So I think we should all be asking the question, so what? And as funders start asking it, especially governments start asking it, there are, in government now, in India, there's a program called EdTech Tonee, which is a comparator of different EdTech platform, EdTech solutions, and they're using that to then make purchasing decisions. So that if you've met these minimum benchmarks, the government's going to select from them, and that incentivizes the system to say, is our product meeting these benchmarks, which will then get you, the developers, the budget that's needed.
Can I speak to that? I think that's a really good question, and something that I've really learned, and I've been in Kytabu, started 13 years ago, but I learned this the last 2 years, is something happens when people are held accountable by robots versus other people. Let me give you a very practical example, and actually being in the US, this completely makes sense to all of you. Cameras on cops. Full stop. The data shows that the fact that they now know that it's a requirement for them to submit those, what are they called? Those chesty camera thingies? Body cams. Now that they know that they have to submit them every evening, pick them up every morning, and keep them on record, shows that your own unfair arrest rate went down 54%. You were getting arrested half the time for nothing. That is insane. Do you know what I mean? And it goes further, because then what happened was there also was a report, I watched this on TV, there was a report that more than 30% of the police who were arresting folks for stuff didn't actually know what they were arresting them for was not arrestable. They didn't. It was a training issue. Oh wait, so I can't arrest you for jaywalk? That's unfortunate. What am I supposed to do? Give you a ticket? That is the same with teachers. A lot of teachers who we are training, we don't know that the training is working because there's nobody with them real time in class to see if the thing that we showed them how to do, they're doing it correctly. And a lot of the times they don't even know they're doing it wrong. So how do you support someone you can't tell isn't doing it right when you have to wait to see the grades at the end of the year and you've got 90 something kids in your class? So to your point, vanity metrics in an era of intelligent technology starts losing merit. So when somebody, to your example of Candy Crush, when somebody comes and says, I've been on Candy Crush 15 days, she's like a superstar of Candy Crush. She's like on 60,000. What was that again? 60,000 score? 30,000? She's really bad. But when you see those kind of metrics for a teacher who has been learning lessons, doing things in class, but you can't measure what that actually translates to in a classroom, and you're able to deploy technology that allows you to see that, then is when things change. Then is when you know Tonee comes for all the courses all the time, but when Tonee's back in class, he's not impacted. So what's the problem? And then you can be able to have meaningful interventions.
Just wanted to add something to that is, and this hype, I don't think is just with AI in education, right? I think it's also been there in edtech, and something we often say, and I often mention to developers or innovators is that when it comes to edtech, the tech is great, but the ed part is absolutely really important. And if we use the example Tonee used in fintech, the fintech space is a really big, space in Africa, minting unicorns essentially. Imagine what he said about, I need to send you some money via text, and then I try to send it and you don't get the money. Right? That solution is not doing what it says it's supposed to do. And so similarly in edtech, whether any type of technology, including AI, is really helping developers focus on that learning outcome and saying, what is it you're trying to do, and is it doing that? And how do you know it's doing it, and to what extent is it doing it? And as we start to introduce a lot more use cases, like Asyia said, about children in more underserved communities, to what extent is it still creating those sort of outcomes? Because those type of outcomes at that scale for that demographic starts to move the needle for us. And having those conversations like that, starts to get them thinking and starts to get them to focus and takes all of the hype around the technology out, because the technology is great, but it is a tool for us to do something. And the power of that tool is being able to use it to create that. and to also incentivize that process and putting money in tools and programs that really unlock that value as well.
So I think we have time for one more question, and Sarushti. All right, we'll combine a few questions. So Shrusti, you ask yours, and we'll take a couple more.
Sure. Thank you so much for your very valuable experiences and insights. My question is more on assessment and evaluation. So with the advent of subjective methods of assessment, such as portfolios, how do you envision AI to support teachers with evaluation of these assessments? And how do we mitigate bias when we know that there could be bias from the AI as well as from teachers themselves?
Right, so a couple more questions from people who haven't asked questions. Okay.
Yeah, so the question is more for Tonee. I'm wondering, you have spent a lot of time building a lot of startup in Kenya, and with the perspective that you have, when you look at the U.S., here, what people focus on what they're doing, do you have any perspective in terms of, if I ask you pick up something that you think here doing it right, and there's something doing it can be improved, do you have some insight to that kind of question? I'd love to learn. Thank you.
So basically removing bias from assessments and also transfer.
I mean, in the same light, I'll use my lecturing voice. In the same vein as this kind of comparing perspectives, I think when you're deploying AI-powered technologies, and this is either to support the teachers or one-on-one support with the students, what differences are you seeing in the way this, like if I'm going to develop technology or deploy technology, what should I be considering in the way that maybe students are using the data? So if you think about cultural differences in how the technologies are being used, right, or the kind of implications that we might see in Kenya or other African spaces that we might not see here in the US. Just great to get your perspective.
Okay, I think I would just start with the last question. I think one of the biggest bits, and we often talk about it, is in terms of the limited amount of time that our children would have access to devices to be able to engage with the solutions. And what that forces you to do in terms of the design of your solution is that you then really need to think, if a child has 1 hour a week, and that's been quite generous in certain situations, how do I design the type of activities or type of engagements that would happen when they interact with the system for that period of time, essentially? And similarly with teachers as well. Another one is in terms of digital literacy skills, right? And I often get that a lot. And for me, I feel like a lot of times people say, why are you introducing technology when they don't have the skills? And I'm like, you're then not deploying solutions that's well designed for the skills that they have. And so taking that into consideration as well is something that's very important. So just examples between how, teachers and students might use it down here compared to back there in Africa. I know we have very short time, so I'll keep my answers short. Next. Tonee?
I'm going to try and answer the two questions at the same time, and then probably go back to the bias question at the end. There is a riddle, I cannot remember what it is right now, but there was a riddle that talked about, the trick in the riddle was trying to figure out how to do more with less than with more, right? We are very good at doing more with less than with more. Privilege is a blind side. The ability to have more makes you less clever than the ability to have less. And we give you a very practical example. If you give a toddler, so it sounds worse than it seems, and I really have to keep preempting apologies because it would not work in the States. If you put in my town, we'd put a toddler in the carton that is used to ship a fridge. It's kind of, so you cut it in half, you put kids in there, you throw stuff inside, then you wait. And over a period of time, you would notice that middle class and upper class kids would get bored and start crying maybe 20 minutes in. But then lower middle class kids would sit there for hours. You'd have to check to see if they're breathing. And you come, they've either drawn on the wall, they've slept on the floor, they've figured out what to do with what they have, because at home they don't have a stack load of toys like the upper middle class kids do. So what's happened is, because this child is used to, I'm just going to use the words again, I keep apologizing, to an ADHD childhood, where they're always moving from one toy to another toy to another toy to another toy to another toy to another. Their minds are always distracted. They don't have the time to just look inward and come up with a way to play with the one or two things they have. That's what we're good at. In our continent, we're good at little. If you research something called the Kadogo economy, Kadogo, K-A-D-O-G-O, it's how we sell stuff. We don't buy tubs of toothpaste like you do, where I dip my toothpaste in a bucket-sized thing and brush my teeth. We have them in 10 ml sizes, kind of like the ones used in aircrafts, because that's what folks can afford. And that microeconomy has built out in everything we do, whether it's the size of our wardrobe, the size of our clothes, the size of our bodies, the size of the things we do. They're all small-based. When you do that in innovation, you have micro but large-scale successes. And so that's the difference between how we do things and how you do things. And that's also reflective in our culture. AI isn't this cool, nice to have. For a classroom this size, with a student who's 5'5", stands in front of a room full of little maniacs of children, because that's what they are at that age, they see it as the last shot to anything because they don't have much. And that's why we see things very differently. And to your question of bias, I think the more information we feed AI, the easier it is for us to create what we desire, because we're not going to roll back time and try and redo LLMs. And so there's a lot more participation that is required. And in that participation, we get us-centric AI. But thank you very much for the time.
We don't want to stand between you and lunch, so please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.
Before everyone gets up, hold on. Important information, because we're not going to be in this room when you come back. Lunch is in the building across the street. It looks like the top picture. There's volunteers to direct you. When you leave lunch, you're not coming back here. You're going to Austin Hall. QR links are all in your... The links are in your QR code for a map to get there. Please arrive by 1:45, because you will get lost. We got lost, so you will get lost. And we're starting right at 2 p.m. I think that's it. Okay, good?
He also owns the money. Yeah, I spoke with
That's why I need to guide her. Oh, okay. I'll take it for her.
Hello? If everybody in Langdale Hall right now, I'm so sorry. So we need everybody to be moving towards the lunch area as soon as possible. I am so sorry. We're going to have a walking train going through the tunnels to where you need to be for lunch very, very soon. So if you please go out to the corridor, the egress just behind us, we're going to have a volunteer that takes you to the tunnel, through the tunnels to where we have our lunch session. But we do need to clear this room in the next 5 minutes. So if you could please, in an orderly fashion, move into the corridor, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Just in case I wasn't heard the first time, if you could please move to the corridor, and then one of our lovely volunteers is going to take you through the tunnels to WCC 3008 for lunch. Again, can I repeat, if you can please make your way to the corridors as soon as you can in an orderly fashion to move through the tunnels to where our lunch session is. If you did not hear me the first time, I am again going to repeat myself. If you can please move into the corridor, and one of our lovely volunteers is going to support you to go through the tunnels to WCC 3008.
Head in that direction. Thank you.
One last announcement. If we can please move towards the corridor, we can continue our networking and these amazing conversations. I know that you've learned a lot from the first 2 morning plenaries, and I'm really excited to continue the conversation. But if you can take all of your amazing conversations and your belongings